Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to talk about film. We love movies on this podcast. I think that's pretty obvious and apparent, and other words
hmm
that mean glaringly, accurately, um, obvious. In any event, we've got two big movies we're going to be talking about this week. We're going to be discussing Frozen 2, the follow up to the smash Disney hit from a few years ago. We will also be discussing A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood starring Tom Hanks. Um, it could be an interesting discussion. I know we all really loved the Mr. Rogers documentary that came out. Was that last year? 2 years ago? I don't even remember at this point. But I'm sure,
Last year, yeah.
yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some natural discussion around that. There's a lot on
Mm.
our plate, but before we can dive into any of that, let me introduce you to two beautiful, wonderful gentlemen who I love very much. Jim Pugliafico is here with us. Jim, how you doing, babe?
I'm doing good. Thanks for the introduction, babe. And yeah, we got two brand new movies to talk about, and hopefully, some of the people who listen to the show got out to see these movies, or maybe they didn't, and they just want to hear the non-spoiler stuff to see if they're going to see them or not.
Yeah, and if we can help with that in some way, I mean, we're all about forming your own opinion of things, but
Of course.
if you like hearing external perspective and you chose us to tune into, thank you for doing that. Will Lindis is here too. Welcome, Will. How are you, Will?
Hey guys, do you want to talk about some movies?
hmm
Because I do.
Build
Yeah,
another snowman.
Snowman Part 2. No, I think that's absolutely right. There's probably a lot of people here who um, maybe didn't get a chance to catch either of these movies opening weekend because they were purposefully waiting to watch these movies over Thanksgiving break, maybe spending some time with their family. They have a few extra days off of work and stuff. So, yeah, if you are in that camp, if you're looking for something to watch over this next week and either of these movies interest you, hopefully we can point you in the right direction.
Or tell you to stay away, depending.
Well, yeah, maybe the right direction
Well,
is towards another
yeah.
theater. Who knows?
Well,
We seldom do that,
I
really.
was gonna
So,
say
We'll see.
we'll give you our opinions on if we think it might be worth staying away, but again, right, it all comes down to your personal judgment. And it is a holiday weekend coming up, so a lot to see. Choices or choice. You may have to make some decisions. Maybe we can help somehow. Speaking of people who haven't seen the movie but are going, Ryan Rivera in the chat says, "Hey, this is perfect timing. I'm literally sitting outside the theater waiting for my sister to see Frozen 2 at this very moment." Well, Ryan, we hope you enjoy
yeah,
Frozen 2. I don't remember
exciting.
where you're located, but I hope you're not frozen while you're waiting for Frozen.
Yeah,
Hey!
I don't know where
Eh,
he is, but it's pretty cold in most parts of the country right now. So he could be close to frozen pretty much anywhere he is. Um, but I mean, that's a cool thing, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, but I always get that feeling of like excited anticipation when I'm ready to go into a movie. You're waiting for your friends to show up, or you're actually going with your friends, and you haven't seen the movie. You're going in, and you're not exactly sure what you're going to get, but yeah, it's I don't know, just that feeling of that movie anticipation feeling. So I'm kind of a little envious of Ryan right now at this very moment.
Or the
I mean,
or
that's a very
or
true
the flip
point.
side, you're irritated that your friends are late, the popcorn all smells burned, and the soda machines are all down for maintenance, but you're hoping that movie is going to make it all better.
And you've seen the trailer for it like 87 times. So at this point, like, as much as you want to see it, there's also a little part of you that just wants to get it over with. But I think for me, there's definitely this feeling that any given movie, realistically, any given movie that you're standing in line for could be the best movie that you're ever going to see in your life. Like it's very likely that we haven't seen the best movie that we're ever going to see yet, and that's pretty exciting about film, right? That like that new discovery, that new mind blowing experience is just around the corner. And so, Ryan, I hope that you and your sister have a wonderful time with it. And I hope that it does, regardless of our thoughts, positive or negative. We haven't gotten that far yet, but we hope that it's a wonderful experience for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, even on a smaller scale, like even if the movie isn't the greatest thing ever, there's always a chance that there's something in there that really thrills you. You know what I mean? Or makes you feel something. And that's what I go to the movies for, is for that feeling. Even if it's fleeting in the movie or just a few moments of the movie, that can make all the difference.
That's very true. Well, we got two big movies to talk about. We're going to jump in here in just a moment. Real quick, though, Hamstrack says, currently at a Thanksgiving party. Going to have to listen to this later on. Sorry to miss this. Hamstrack, we're sorry to miss you, but you know what? Happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the party, and hopefully we'll catch up with you next week. Big hello to everyone else who's joining us in the live chat as well. Looks like we've got several folks who have hopped on. We love you, and we appreciate you tuning in, whether it's in the live stream, whether it's on iTunes or Spotify, Overcast, whatever your favorite way of digesting podcasts is. Thank you for being here with us this week. Will, Jim, are we ready to return to Arendelle?
Let's
Into
go.
the unknown.
Let's go.
Well, then let's do the next right thing and talk about Frozen 2. All right, of course, we're going to talk about Frozen 2, spoiler-free, for probably, 10 minutes or so. And then we'll give you a fair warning before we open up that can of spoilers in case you want to protect your virginal innocence. But, Will, if you wouldn't mind, give us, a little bit of a brief setup. I mean, this is a sequel, so I don't know how much we need. But was this worth checking out in theaters, waiting for rental, or skipping entirely as well? What do you think?
Absolutely. So here we are with Frozen 2, sequel to Frozen. One of the most successful animated movies of all time, I think, until it was dethroned this year. So Frozen 2 is, it features your same lovable cast of characters that you hopefully fell in love with in the first film. You've got Anna and Elsa and Kristoff and Olaf and Sven. They're all back together, and this time, they have to leave Arendelle, and they're traveling to this ancient, enchanted forest that is shrouded in mist and in mystery. In doing so, they hope to find out a little bit more about Elsa, about her powers, and also to find out a little bit more about a new threat to the land. I think that coming into Frozen 2, me personally, I feel as though I had some fatigue with this franchise, right? Not as much because of Frozen, although, I mean, I think there's probably a point, no matter how much we loved Let It Go, that every one of us probably hit their breaking point at some point with just like how much you heard it, right?
The whole prequel series and all that stuff, it gets to be a lot,
And then you have, but outside of that alone, you then have Olaf's Frozen Adventure, which came out as the short film before Coco, and it was an absolute train wreck disaster. I hated it. And so coming into this, I wasn't sure where I was going to fall on this one. I liked Frozen. I hated that short. And I ended up quite liking Frozen 2. I think that what worked for me quite well here is I think that the humor felt a lot more balanced than it did in that short. I think the Olaf stuff, Olaf has some comedic bits because that's what he is. He's the comic relief. But for whatever reason, just the jokes were better and landed better and felt like they were fleshed out a lot more. I really liked the songs. I don't know that there is as much of an earworm as there was in the first one, but I do think that the songs here are super high quality, and I've been listening to the soundtrack a bunch in my car ever since seeing it. So, I mean, there's something to be said for that. The story is a little bit darker in places, and it definitely expands on the lore that we've had in the film so far. I've got some quibbles. I think the film has a lot that it tries to set up, and sometimes it just takes some shortcuts with saying something. It'll just say, oh, by the way, the characters feel this way or they learned this thing. Just accept it and they move on. And you don't necessarily have a lot of time to exist in some of those moments. But whatever. I think that by and large, this film knows what notes it's trying to hit. I think it hits them pretty well. And when we get to spoilers, I have a super fiery hot take about why this film is one of the most progressive Disney movies that has happened to date, and in a good way. But we'll get there. We'll get there. But yeah, I think this is a recommend for me. I think that it's, especially if you're looking for something to see with your family, I think this feels a lot like a comfortable blanket, like you can just sort of like cozy up under, like it's a very familiar feeling here. But it's also got enough new to sort of like warrant its existence. So yeah, it's a recommend.
But Will, question, is it a 25-pound comfy blanket?
I saw on your Facebook that's like your new thing. You've got like the weighted blanket, sort of like the warm hug as you're sleeping, right?
It's not an Olaf warm hug, but it's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it probably feels a lot akin to that.
All right. Well, big recommend from Will. Jim, how about for you?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same camp as Will. I rather liked Frozen 2. I did like Frozen quite a bit. I was taken with the story, the characters, of course, the music. That one had that big earworm, Let It Go. As Will said, this one has some great music sprinkled throughout, and we'll probably talk about some of the songs and the treatments for the songs in the movie, especially in one case, which I thought was kind of brilliant. And yeah, I think this is a great movie to see over the holidays, whether it's with, whether you have family and you want to see with family, or whether, your chosen family, your friends that maybe enjoyed the first movie and want another dose. It'd be a good one to go see in a group, because it is a lot of fun. I think the Disney, the Disney stamp is on this, so the quality is top notch in terms of the the story, the animation, the music, and the cast. Again, the same great voice cast. I don't know if there are any new faces in this. There are some new voices in this one, and we'll talk about some of those. But I really, really like this movie, and I can't wait to hear about the hot takes, because I think there's maybe a few little things we can talk about that may have come out of this movie, and are there to be talked about other than the main storyline. But yes, I did like Frozen 2. I recommend it to anybody to go see. I think it's a perfect movie to see over the holiday weekend.
All right. So another big recommend for Jim. 2 recommends in a row. There's a lot of pressure on me. But before I reveal my opinion, Josh in the chat says, for me, music wasn't as catchy, I think, compared to the first one. Although soundtrack listens afterward may change that, he says. But the story was heaps better than the first. Will, Jim, real quick, without giving spoilers, of course, would you agree with Josh? Do you think the story in this one was better than the first?
The story was more. Will had said the story was had some darker elements to it, and it did. But I think the story felt a little bit more like substantial, of course, it wasn't as wrapped up in trying to introduce us to these characters and their origins and stuff like that. Although it did touch on some origins, and we'll get to that in spoilers. But they were, with the characters already established, they could focus more on telling a distinct story, and I think they did here, and that showed.
Yeah, I think the first Frozen was, since it was a subversion of the Disney princess romance plot, I think that it worked best because it was so simple. And if it was too complicated, it would have been a worse film for it. But because they've now done that story and are free to just sort of play in the sandbox, they got to flex their narrative muscle a little bit. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would.
By the way, I'm sorry, Brad. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Thought I have one other.
Go.
Oh, you were talking about Josh's comment in the chat, and I think I saw on Facebook that Josh, during his screening out in California, had a surprise guest as they were watching Frozen. I think Josh Gad showed up in the theater in the screening that he was watching, and came in and just kind of gave a little hello and an introduction. Is that right? Did I get that right, Josh? let me know. Brad, I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. Josh says, "Oh yes, Josh Gad stopped by just as the movie started." Josh, hope you got a warm hug from Josh Gad. I know a lot of people in our community would love that very much. I have to agree with you guys and Josh's comment in the chat. I definitely feel like the second movie, it carries more weight for me. And interestingly, this movie deals with some elements of like grief and isolationism and some really heavy duty things you don't expect in a kids movie that I don't think it could really do as much in the first movie. They kind of got to take some risks with this one, and I think from a plot perspective, it really paid off a lot. And I'm ecstatic to jump into spoilers with you guys here in a couple of minutes and talk some of those things through. One thing I do want to mention, I also agree, the songs in this film are good. I don't think they're quite as good or catchy as the first movie, but there are 3 really standout songs for me, and I'm looking forward to talking those through. Yeah, I mean, I would say this is definitely like go see this in theaters, big screen, great sound. It's a holiday weekend here in the United States, at least. If you're looking for something to see, hard to go wrong with Frozen 2.
Right. And Will, go ahead.
No, I didn't have a thing. Go for it.
Will was mentioning in the chat about one of the songs at the end, and I if we talk about songs, is that kind of a spoiler?
We should save that.
All right. We'll
okay. Any other non-spoiler thoughts before we open that can of worms?
Let's see.
So I won't say what it is, but I would recommend anyone that goes and sees this sticks around through the end of the credits, because there is a post credit scene that I thought was, while not crucial to the plot, was still fun. So yeah. Recommend sit through the credits. You should often do that anyways, but there's a reason to do it with this
95% of our theater audience left and completely missed it. So Will, that's some good advice right there.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy these days that audiences would, I don't know, maybe there's still a lot of people who haven't got the message that Disney on a lot of their properties put stuff in the trailer, in the credits and after the credits these days. But or there's an app that can tell you that too.
There is indeed. All right, guys, are we ready to make the spoiler transition?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. For those of you who have not yet seen Frozen 2, and you want to protect your innocence where the movie's plot is involved, this is your opportunity. Step away for 20 minutes. Come on back for our non-spoilery discussion of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, if you want to hear that. If you're listening to the magic of digital tape delay, just skip ahead using the time index in the show notes. But spoilers for Frozen 2 are officially fair game. Where do you guys want to start?
The music?
I think that makes sense. Yeah. So sure, let's do it.
I was totally thrilled with there's a song sung by Christoph. Christoph gets a song in this movie called "Lost in the Woods." I think the name of it is, and the treatment it kind of falls kind of toward the middle of the movie somewhere maybe, and it's a song about him and his he's had unsuccessful attempts to propose marriage to it's Anna, right?
It is Anna.
In love with. Yeah. And through a series of unlucky events, he's just been unable to make that proposal. And in the meantime, he's kind of unsure now of his love for her, and his love for her. So he has a song called about doubts in a relationship, which I thought was pretty good. And that's a pretty mature, I guess, theme for a song in like a kid's movie. So I think that was really good. But what really caught me was the treatment they gave to the song. They basically gave it every 80s rock or ballad rock music video trope that they could throw at this thing, and it was hilarious. Now, granted, Brad and I were about the only ones in our theater. I think that might have been like kind of onto the joke, and we're laughing our asses off, and everyone around us, I think, was like, "What are you guys laughing at? This song's not that funny." But it was. I thought it was a brilliant stroke, and probably one of the best. One of the things that excited me most about the movie, and it came at the right time, kind of right in the middle of the film.
Yeah, that visual of Kristoff like in the dark with like the reindeer like around him, like a Queen video. That was really spectacular. Enjoyed that song quite a bit.
And I think we had a slightly older audience for my screening, because when I'm thinking back to the scenes that most went over like gangbusters, I think that got the loudest reaction of probably any scene of the movie, maybe aside from like Olaf's retelling moments. But it was mostly adults in my screening, and every time one of those like rock video cliches showed up on screen, like the whole theater just erupted. It went over as intended. So I'm right there with you. I think that's really good. Not as big a fan of the Weezer cover that sits in the credits. But whatever. I think for me, my favorite songs in this, I really like the "All Is Found," the song that is sung by the mother at the beginning, sung originally by Evan Rachel Wood. I think it's a very, very beautiful and tender song, and I tend to like music that has sort of like a folky vibe. But I also very much appreciate, in the credits, there's a cover of it by Casey Musgraves, which absolutely like melted my heart. I've been listening to that on repeat since I saw the movie. So I think that's my standout song.
Yeah, and Will, I know we mentioned it in the chat, but I heard that song. And I'm like, oh, I really like this song. That really sounds like Nickel Creek, like Sarah Watkins is singing. Their voices sound almost exactly the same, and of course, the style of music is, kind of that folky, soft folky kind of song. So that's what kind of threw me off with that. And I'm not, at that huge a fan of Casey Musgraves, but I guess I'm gonna have to listen to a little more.
What?
Yeah, I know.
Gasps and gay. What?
Stairs and Mandalorian.
Now, is that typical of her music, Will, or is not?
That's a little more folky. I mean, she tends towards like modern country stylings. But also, if it helps too, she's a huge LGBTQ ally. So that's like, it's also like, it makes you feel good. Just like, oh, thank God I'm supporting like one of the good ones.
Great. Yeah, I'll give it a listen. And Brad, I know you have another favorite song that we need to talk about.
I do, and it's probably the saddest song in the whole movie. But it's the
sad songs.
I know, right? It's "The Next Right Thing," as sung by Kristen Bell, the Anna character. We're in spoilers now. She has lost Elsa. Olaf has ostensibly died. Shocker. He comes back.
Thanos.
He got Thanos. But she, she's like lost in this cave, and she's like in this, slump on the ground in grief and crying. And she sings this amazing song about how, like, in order to move forward, like, she will hold herself back from like looking too far ahead because that's overwhelming. But she'll like break it down and focus on just the next breath, focus on just the next step, focus on just the next right thing. And I thought that was, I don't know, I was getting some like Steven Universe vibes from that a little bit, because like helping kids to deal with complicated feelings, Steven Universe does really well through its songs. And I felt like this was one of those songs that's like a backdoor therapy session for kids or anybody that struggled with grief and depression and just feels like they can't get out of bed that day, or, they can't get off the couch because they just can't summon the motivation to like get up and go to work, or get up and do things around the house that have to be done. And this idea of just sort of breaking it down and focusing on just putting one foot in front of the other. I know it's not Christmas yet, but I think is a really powerful message. And Kristen Bell's voice acting as she sang this song. I've been listening to this song on repeat. Well, this was my repeat song. And
Yeah.
just the little things she does with like her breath catching, or like, you know, like a little gulp in her throat as she's singing. I felt it was just masterful. Like, it was a beautiful performance. And I feel really lucky to get a kid's movie like this that has such a great like coping mechanism song in it.
I mean, this is really a stellar year for Kristen Bell too, because not only is she, I mean, I think she was good in the first Frozen, but I do kind of feel like when you think about like the strong vocal performances, you immediately think of Idina Menzel, right? Because I mean, she's fucking Idina Menzel. And nothing against her, Kristen Bell singing in that first one. It's just, I think that, you know, she didn't get the big crazy power song, and here she really got to flex that not just the power, but I think more so like the control and the nuance. And I do feel that there's something sort of fitting about, like, it feels like the last couple of years, for whatever reasons you might attribute it to, have felt a lot more like just generally like stressful and oppressive just in general, just to be a human being on this planet. And so I think that there's something complex and mature about going from 2013, do you want to build a snowman, to 2019, hello darkness, I'm ready to succumb.
Yeah.
Like, that is 100% a mood, and I'm like, I get it.
And just the arc within that song, like going from like almost complete hopelessness to hopefulness by the end of the song. I mean, I think it's a great song, and I think it's a great performance. And I think overall the music, the songs in this movie, I think they probably aren't going to have the Let It Go kind of, you know, everybody singing it, but I think overall, I think the quality of the music and the songs in this movie are, you know, they brought their A+ game, I think, to this, you know, giving Kristoff the song, you know, a song, and such a strong song for Anna. And of course, you know, Elsa had her song also. So yeah, I think I would, if I had to pick, I'd say the music in this version of Frozen is actually outdoes the first version for me.
Wow. Bold statement.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think it's probably stronger quality of music. I just don't think that it has like the same like catchiness or pop appeal type thing. Like, I don't think Into the Unknown is going to be the next Let It Go.
Maybe not.
I don't.
But Will, you could put on a glitzy dress, walk into the Iron Bear, and be like, "Show yourself." That would work.
I mean, I could, and maybe I will.
Yeah.
No,
You can save that for their
you know,
grand reopening party in the new location.
Put that Maleficent thing back on again.
Yeah, I could. I've been known to do Disney drag. You know, another of the songs that I really liked, and this is, it's a through line through some of the other songs, but there is this voice that like calls to the characters from yeah, and it becomes like part of the it's the sirens call in Into the Unknown, and it becomes one part of the melody of Show Yourself itself. And both of those songs I quite enjoy, but that melody, there's this Norwegian singer named Aurora, who Scott, my partner, and I are just absolutely enamored with. And through the movie, we're just like, we know this voice. Like, just, that's, who is that? And so when we see it in the credits, we just like, flipped our shit, saying like, oh my God, they got Aurora. They got Aurora. That's so good. So if anyone, mini plug now, go listen to Aurora's music. It's really fucking good.
I really loved how they took that little motif, that like 3 or 4 note motif that comes out like a call from a distance, and they kind of incorporated that in to some of the other musical segments of the movie, which I thought was really well done as well. It kind of gave me chills in certain spots. I want to talk a little bit. I know we just talked a lot about the music. I want to talk a little bit about the story before we have to go to the next movie. But it seemed to rely on some other properties that we're aware of, right? This whole 4 elements thematic thing.
Earth, fire, air, water. Only the Avatar, Elsa, could bring peace to the 4 nations. That's one.
Or you could think that she's the 5th element.
There's that. We had that. We had elements of Superman, right? Fortress of Solitude.
The Fortress of Solitude. Yeah, that was a pretty obvious influence on the movie. Um, I'm not, I watched the Avatar, but I'm not. I mean, it struck me when I saw it. I'm like, oh, I know that from the Avatar, but it didn't. I don't, it served the story well. It didn't. It was just a little thing that we'd lean over and say, oh, that's the Fortress of Solitude. But it didn't. It didn't. For me, it didn't weaken the story at all. Leaning on those properties.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely was happy to see, it kind of doing its own thing though too. But there was also some fun Easter eggs. I don't know if you guys noticed at the beginning when Anna and Elsa as kids are like playing. There's like a little snow Baymax, and there's like a little like lots of other
yep.
characters, which was fun.
The the Disney United theory, is takes a step forward and a step backward in this movie, because you have cross lines like that, and I think in the first Frozen you saw like Rapunzel's family show up briefly, or something along those lines. I forget, but in this one, there's long been a theory that the Anna and Elsa's parents, they die on a boat wreck, and that's supposed to be the boat that the Little Mermaid swims in Disney's The Little Mermaid, but this movie debunked that by placing that boat in a very different place. So one step forward, one step backward for the United Theory truthers out there.
Speaking of one step forward, one step back, I wanted to circle back to the Kristoff thing real quick. Jim, you
Yeah.
mentioned the failed attempts of Kristoff trying to propose to Anna in this movie.
Oh boy,
I,
yes.
I actually thought they were going to do something really interesting here and have them not end up getting together. In fact, Kristoff meets Ryder in the Northern Tribe, and they both talk for their reindeer, and they seem like very similar characters. And I was like, are they going to give each other blowjobs? Are they going to like become a thing instead of Anna and Kristoff? I didn't think the movie would go quite that far, but after the song, I kind of wondered if like they might scale
He's
back
having a
on the
change of
relationship.
heart.
Like he mentioned to Anna earlier in the film, he's like, "Well, you were crazy to, hook up with Hans or whatever." And she's like, "I was crazy?" And then he was like, "Well, no, no, no. I mean, you're just naive. You jump into things really fast." I'm naive? What? So part of me thought, well, maybe he's rethinking like, her jumping into this relationship with him. And I was like, are we really going to get the Pat like marriage ending? And we kind of
Yeah, is he doing what he thinks is
right.
the right thing versus, you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, versus what's really in his heart. Especially when we got that song, I'm like, oh, this could be the turning point for them. And then they just kind of drop the whole thing, and then at the end, he just gets to propose, and it's all Disney
Mm-hmm.
happy again. And I was like, I wonder if there was a story thread there, because, man, I don't know if you can get like. I don't know if Gaydar works on animated characters, but I can tell you right now that Ryder was hot for Kristoff. Like his eyes were puppy dog eyes, like when he was talking to Kristoff, and then he just kind of disappeared from the movie, unfortunately.
I think one of the missed opportunities here is, and this was one of those quibbles I mentioned kind of in the pre-spoiler section, but I think that this movie doesn't do enough to give the characters that romantic reward at the end, because it's spent this time basically having them at odds with one another, and the solution is, okay, well, let's just get married. I would have loved if right there at the end Christoph was like, we've done it, we've saved Arendelle. Anna, I missed you so much, and I have a very important question for you. Anna, will you attend couples counseling with me? Like, that's the thing this movie needed. I'd like to bring up my hot take real quick, and it's one that's actually being called out here in chat as well. So looks like Josh also picked up on this as well. This is one of the first Disney movies that I can think about that tackles the topic of colonialism, and specifically how best to deal with that after the fact. We have the people of Arendelle who essentially, because of the wrongs of one person in the past, fucked over like the indigenous people of this area, right? They walled off the waters, and it's caused them to be trapped here, and it's caused the magic to be all wonky and stuff like that. And I
Then
think
attack.
that Yeah, and then attack them. And so what the people of Arendelle, specifically like the monarchy, Anna is willing to do is to trash everything, to bring everything down, to bring parity between basically her kingdom and the people that were wronged. And I think that's a lot to tackle for a Disney
It's
movie.
very simplistic solutions to very complex problems.
Simplistic solutions to complicated problems, but they're still solutions that I'm seeing done in a way that doesn't get done a lot of times. A lot of times in these movies, the ruling class, you think like The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast, anything like that. Once you are like the monarchy, you're sort of absolute, and then unless you bring the peasant up into the monarchy class. But here they destabilize some of the wrongs that have been happening in the past. I think that's really cool. I love that Disney told this type of story. I think that it really hammered home like kind of what the true strength of the story was, and kind of like, why do you even make a sequel to Frozen 2? Well, to tell this type of story. So I absolutely appreciated that they took a stab at this.
I think the message that it's okay to upset the apple cart, turn the world upside down without regard for others, as long as Elsa's there to make a magic ice force field, is super powerful.
I think at this point, like, they were willing to, the people that had taken the land.
I get it. It was a joke. Yeah. It was a joke.
Yeah,
I didn't miss the real message.
No, but so yeah, but I'm not sure they carried it out to its conclusion. Of course, they carried it out kind of in a Disney fairy tale kind of way, where the damage that gets done by they have this instantaneous kind of undoing of something that was done and screwed things up for so long and created this huge deluge of water that's going to wash Arendelle away. And she creates an ice spell, and then I don't know what happened after that. It's like the water's all gone, or like it was very weird.
It's rushed. I do think it kind of goes back to that quibble of it being rushed, because I thought the same thing. Just like, oh, cool. Well, where did it go? Did it get redirected? Yeah. I think that there's another city right down the street, like Marindale, that just absolutely got fucked over by this.
I guess thing. I just think that would have been more interesting if Arendelle had been destroyed, and both communities had to build a new community together from the ground up.
Yes.
I don't quite know why Disney sort of petered out on that. Maybe it's a kid thing. Maybe they had to sell fucking Arendelle ice castles. I don't know. But I thought that would have made it better.
I think they'll sell enough of the little blue flame monster that didn't even have to be in the movie that probably make up for not selling Arendelle ice castles.
Oh,
I mean, he was cute as fuck. Don't get me wrong. He's cute and lovable and all that shit. And it's like, oh my God, look at that thing. But I don't think he did a fucking thing in the movie other than run around and like shoot purple flames everywhere.
I'm 1,000% next time I'm at Disney going to get some of that little blue lizards merch, which I'm sure exists in Epcot, in kind of the area right around the Frozen ride. I'm 1,000% gonna buy it, and I'm gonna bring it home to my house, because fuck yeah,
guys! I got something from Amazon today. I want to show you. Are you ready? You're gonna love this. Hold on, let me get it. This is so cool. Look, it's a Gale toy. How cool is that, Gale?
For those that are listening to the audio version only, Brad just held up an empty hand to the screen.
A handful of
because
air.
Gale is the wind
handful of air
character.
Yeah, it's a good joke. Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
But he was cute. A cute little character. I just wish he had done a little more. That would have been.
Josh in the chat says, if you watch closely, Jim, the scene that you referenced when Elsa stops the water, the rumored gay bear Oaken turns and hugs a chaser in relief.
Oh, because he's happy that the deluge didn't hit Arendelle.
But didn't he have
and take out the gay bar?
But didn't the ice bear? Didn't Oaken have like a family and 10 kids in the first one at their sauna bathhouse place?
Like that makes a difference.
Look who we're talking to. All right, guys, we got a whole nother movie to talk about, so we probably should move on. Final call for final thoughts on Frozen 2.
Yeah, this one was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I know, Brad, you already bought the soundtrack. It's probably one. It's probably one that we'll buy the movie when it's released digitally, so that we can give it another watch. Because I think when Frozen came out, I think we watched it maybe 3 times in the theater, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure we'll catch this one again in the theater, but definitely when it gets re-released, it's worth it. Another really quality job, I think, by Disney. Both a really good story, some great messaging in here, and of course the characters we love, and a few new ones as well.
Will, any final thoughts from you?
Nothing too major. I do think that give the soundtrack a bit of a listen. Maybe like the first couple of songs. Don't go too deep. But give the first 2 songs a listen. And if they sound interesting to you and you're still on the fence, maybe that'll help make up your mind. Just don't listen to like tracks like 6 or 7. That's where the spoilers lie.
Good tip. For me, one final thing I wanted to say or do was tip my cap to Sterling K. Brown from This Is Us, who showed up and played a guard captain. I forget the character's name.
Mateus?
I think Lieutenant something.
Mateus.
Okay,
Matthias.
yeah. I thought he did a great job with the material, and he has a very recognizable voice. And like the first time he spoke, I was like, "Oh my god, I don't watch This Is Us anymore," but it's Sterling K. Brown. Great to see him show up.
This was a big weekend for Sterling Brown for me too, because he was in another movie that I ended up watching this weekend, and so it's just like, which is not a bad thing at all to be sort of like
he's in Waves, right?
Yeah, he's in Waves, and so it's just like seeing him in 2 movies like in the same weekend was just sort of like, this is good.
And we're gonna basically talk about This Is Us in the next movie we're talking about next. So hang in there. He's not in it. No, he's not.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and move on to our second movie of this week's episode. We are going to go ahead and put Frozen 2 on ice. See what I did there? And if you've not yet seen A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood starring Tom Hanks, don't worry. We're going to talk about the movie spoiler-free for probably 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. We'll see how things go before we give you that warning and go to spoiler territory. Or the neighborhood of spoilers? I don't know. That's my best Mr. Rogers pun. In any event, Josh says he's heading out before the next movie. No worries, Josh. Great having you with us in the chat. We'll see you later. Take care. I don't know why I'm waving at the camera. You can't see me. We don't have video right now. Alas. But folks, here we go. Our discussion of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. All right, Jim, if you could set this movie up, please. Give us your thoughts.
Sure.
Without those spoileries.
Sure. I'll read from IMDb. What we're going to be talking about here is Won't You Be My Neighbor, the new movie. I'll say about or featuring kind of a fictionalized, true-to-life story, supposedly a true story based on true life, that is called A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And it's based on the true story of a real-life friendship between Fred Rogers, that's Mr. Rogers, and journalist Tom Junod. Junod? Although in the movie, the name has been changed, which is interesting. I don't know the full story behind that. Maybe one of you do. This movie was directed by Marielle Heller and stars Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers and Chris Cooper, Matthew Reese, I guess it's Reese. Sorry about that. And several other people that pop up and you say, oh, I recognize that guy, but then you have to go look it up in IMDb, figure out who they are. So this movie comes out a year after the documentary called Won't You Be My Neighbor, and they both have neighbor in the title, and that's kind of throwing me off a little bit. But this is a fictionalized or dramatized version of a small relationship that Mr. Rogers formed with a writer that was sent to do a piece on him from Esquire magazine. And going into this, I was a little hesitant because, man, did I really love that documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? It was one of the top films, I think, maybe for all of us that year, last year. And so I'm like, oh, man, they're going to do another Mr. Rogers. I hope they get it right. Tom Hanks is great. I saw the trailer. It looked pretty good. But I was having difficulty with, Tom Hanks kind of acting like Mr. Rogers. Tom Hanks is a great actor, and he can, take on the persona and the mannerisms of different characters. I just wasn't sure if he was going to capture Mr. Rogers, and I think he did it fine in this movie. This one's gonna be a little tough to talk about in spoilers until we get to spoilers, because I don't want to give away too much. If people don't know the story of Fred Rogers and his relationship that he developed with this reporter writer, I don't want to spoil too much until we get into spoilers. But let's say that like I said, it focuses on a lot, and maybe even a lot more than it focuses on Mr. Rogers. Focuses on this character called Lloyd Vogel, who I guess is a stand-in for the real life Tom Junot. I ended up liking the movie. I can't say I loved it. I think for two main reasons. One, it was hard to beat what I saw the documentary, which was actually it was showing me the real Fred Rogers and more of the story behind Fred Rogers and why he became such a champion of empathy and compassion and children's understanding. And this movie just kind of picks up and tells one little sliver of a specific interaction that he had. But it also dove into a drama that was going on in this Lloyd Vogel's life, which I thought was pretty standard family drama kind of stuff. And that we see a lot of. And so the difference, though, was how Mr. Rogers played a big part in influencing this character. I like the movie. I think it's worth seeing. I think it's it's a well-made movie. I think the characterizations are pretty spot on. Although I did have trouble a little bit getting past Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, and sometimes I wasn't sure if I was seeing Mr. Rogers or Tom Hanks playing Mr. Rogers. So for me, it's a lukewarm recommend.
All right, a lukewarm recommend from Jim. Will, any warmer for you or colder?
Maybe a little warmer. So I actually, this one is funny you should mention warm and cold. I feel very similarly to this movie as I did to Frozen 2. I think both are movies that are in the I really liked this category, but neither falls in the great or loved this category. Let's talk about why. So like you, Jim, I was a little worried coming into this one because I think the Tom Hanks portrayal, as we see in the trailer, feels like it's a little off, right? And it's hard to say exactly why in the trailer, but it just doesn't feel like you're watching like a clone of Mr. Rogers on screen. And also, you're right. We just watched Won't You Be My Neighbor, an absolutely stellar documentary, one of the best films of last year, period. And so it almost feels like, is this film needed and is this film necessary right now? And I think that taking those two things into consideration, I think what this film did, director Marielle Heller here, she did Can You Ever Forgive Me and Diary of a Teenage Girl. I think that she adapts this material in the best way possible. In that this is not a movie like a Womb to Tomb style story about Mr. Rogers and his life. We already kind of had that in the documentary. Nor is it a film that focuses 100% on the Mr. Rogers character. Instead, this is a story about how Mr. Rogers' warmth and kindness and just his message touched one specific person. It's an example of like why universal kindness being reflected in one specific story. And I think that's the most compelling way if you're going to do this type of narrative to do it. Even watching the movie, Tom Hanks doesn't disappear into this role. I was always aware I was watching Tom Hanks. Part of that's because the voice sounds a little odd, like he was trying to do the voice, but it didn't quite land. And the hair looked a little off. Tom Hanks is a great actor, but he's not usually the type of actor that I would say disappears into roles. I usually feel like I'm watching Tom Hanks and Tom Hanks movies, and that was the case here. But again, I think he did the best he could with this material, and I think the film did a great job of using him in the right way. Because the one thing that Tom Hanks does get right, he always feels to me in his movies that he is a very warm, kind person. I don't know what he's like in real life, but that's the feeling I get from Tom Hanks. And I think that he channels that into the performance, and that warmth radiates out of the character. And I think that's the strength. I honestly, I liked the stuff with the vocals the best. Like, I thought that it was really interesting watching someone who had a case of the grumps, who had a case of the my heart is 3 sizes too small, get this touching song from Whoville, and it brighten up his holiday season. I think that it was really nice. I think I could very much put myself in that scenario. I think there's times when I felt a little bit like the sky was falling, or that like every single thing was another setback, or that like the grudges that I've held on to were just sort of clawing at me and pulling down on me. And I think that this movie is a strong reminder of kind of the power of forgiveness, the power of friendship, the power of the relationships that we build around us. And I think that when you talk about movies that you watch this time of year, I think that's very welcome and very well on the docket. So not a perfect movie, but again, I think the strongest part is the direction. Marielle Heller absolutely kills it with kind of the direction that she takes this story.
Sounds like another recommend. Man, we're on a recommend train or trolley, if you will, with this movie.
Lesson learned. We just need to review more bad movies.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna come out and say it. This is one of my favorite movies of 2019. I absolutely love this movie. Completely agree with you. Tom Hanks is obviously Tom Hanks playing Mr. Rogers, but I think that warmth and earnestness, Jim, that was a good term. Definitely, shine through the character. And I feel like it just kind of reaches through the screen and like grabs you and holds you in a hug and helps you feel like things are going to be okay. And, I was going back today and rewatching some old Mr. Rogers clips, and not to deliberately compare Tom Hanks to Mr. Rogers, because that would be super unfair, but just to kind of re-immerse myself. I thought about watching the documentary again, but I was like, it's so good. I don't know that I want to watch it again, and but anyway, some of the clips that I was watching were just like Mr. Rogers interacting with certain kids or people, and I was thinking about that scene in the movie where the kid and his parents are on stage, and the little kid is hooked up to an oxygen machine or something, and he's got a New Adventures of He-Man sword. First of all, that was the first of his problems, because the New Adventures of He-Man was terrible. So that's probably why he was so upset. But second, that was just such a great scene, seeing that kid overcome his resistance to talking, or his fear of a stranger, or whatever he was being affected by. And watching some of the old clips of Mr. Rogers, I mean, he did that all the time with many kids, not just there on the set, but through the TV screen. I've talked to many people ever since Won't You Be My Neighbor came out last year about how Mr. Rogers touched their lives, and how he always spoke to them as if, they were the only kid in the world and he was talking just to them. And so going into the movie, I'm kind of like, gosh, how are you going to do that in a narrative movie? But he did it. There at the end of the movie, Tom Hanks is thanks for letting me tell you the story of my friend Lloyd Vogel, whatever. And then he starts giving us like the end of the show, right? Where he's like putting his shoes back on and singing the end song. And I felt like I was a little kid again, like watching Mr. Rogers, like talking to me and helping me feel like things were going to be okay. And, especially around this time of year, holidays are happy, but holidays are also really hard, especially if you've lost, beloved members of your family. Like that comes up and you think about that. And I cried a lot during this movie. But it was like a cathartic cry. It was like a good cry. Like, I think between this and the Do the Next Right Thing song from Frozen 2, like, I got some, I don't know, I got some really good, like, cathartic, like, sad season, happy season stuff out of this. So, was this movie needed? That's a great question. I don't think it's fair to say because of Won't You Be My Neighbor it wasn't needed. I think a lot of people don't like documentaries. And even if they liked Mr. Rogers, they didn't want to watch a documentary about Mr. Rogers. But a lot of people do like narrative films like this and are going to see this. So I would say, yeah, it's needed. And I hope that it has the same powerful impact for everyone going to see it as it did for me. Because it's definitely one I'll be buying. And I'm sure we'll come up in our conversation in a couple months as we reflect on the best films of 2019.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think being a non-documentary, you're right. I think some people just don't. They have a bias against documentaries, which is unfortunate, but it's there. And I think putting out a big like studio release with a big actor name, Tom Hanks, in front of it, I think is going to get more people to see the story, and that is good. So I think that is you say needed. I would agree with that. You mentioned like crying all the way through. I cried all the way through the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor. I don't think I cried once during this movie, and I feel bad for that because I wish I had almost seen them like in opposite order. I think it would have been. I think it would have worked better for me if I had seen these in opposite order, because the scene you mentioned, the little boy, he had like a breathing tube, and he was there with his parents, and he had the He-Man sword, and Fred Rogers is talking to him and trying to get him to like open up. I've seen the real one, you know what I mean? And that like brings me down every time. I don't mean bring me down like depresses me. I mean just like takes my guard down every time, and I'm a blubbering mess. In this one, I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, well that was interesting that they tried to recreate it, but I know exactly what it is, and I don't know. I know that's my issue and that's my hang up. And I feel bad for that. And I think that maybe prevented me from enjoying this movie as much as I possibly could have. One thing I did like about this movie, I loved the way they showed travel and time and place. I thought that, and Brad, you mentioned the framing device of the opening of the show and the closing of the show. I thought that was really well done. I liked how they did that at the beginning and the end. But I also liked those interstitial scale model kind of things that they did, like the Land of Make Believe. I thought that was a really cool touch. I can't remember the movie we saw that in once. It was all puppets. Do you remember that?
What was that
one?
Really,
it was a relationship movie. It was about a guy who he was a
smoking
on a business
puppet
trip.
Was it? Was he played by Kevin Spacey or something?
And we saw the two dolls having sex. Do you remember?
Yeah, it was like a serious movie.
Wait, are you thinking Anomalisa?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah. Yes, I know.
Okay, yeah.
They used it seemed like the same kind of techniques with the planes and stuff. They reminded me of that movie.
I have to say, one of the things that really excited me about the framing device and the transition scenes of this movie was that it made the entire thing feel, like you mentioned, Brad, like an episode of Mr. Rogers, right? And because of that, the fact that we have this theme of this, what we're supposed to learn from Vogel's message, right? It became not just a what are we exploring in the movie, but it almost forced it in a good way into being a message that you're supposed to take away from the movie with you, because that's the delivery. That's what Mr. Rogers did. He gave you a thing that you could take and incorporate into your own life. And I thought that was brilliant. I think that whether it happened in the script process, whether it happened in direct, as they're blocking everything out, or what combination of it was, I think it was an absolutely brilliant way to tell this story.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
We'll move to spoilers here in just a second. One thing I just wanted to call out real quick before we do. An actress showed up in this movie that I was so delighted to see. Wendy McKenna plays a character named Dorothy. But Wendy McKenna is also well known for playing Sister Mary Robert in Sister Act, the quiet nun that finds her voice. And I was so delighted to see Wendy pop up on my screen. I was like, oh my God, Sister Mary Robert.
Yep. Picked it out, and I'm like, who?
Indeed. All right, guys, are we ready for spoilers?
Sure. Let's do it. Let's
Yeah.
move into spoilers. Sure.
All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and make that transition then into the neighborhood of spoilers. If you haven't seen A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood yet and you want to, protect your innocence where the plot is concerned, this is your opportunity as I blather to step away for 15 minutes, coming back at the end for some plugs. Or if you're listening through iTunes, Spotify, whatever, feel free to use the time index in the show notes. You can thank Jim for that. Jim, thanks for making it easier for our listeners to skip around. Here we go. Our discussion, or our spoilery discussion of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood begins. Guys, where do you want to start?
We talked about music a lot with Frozen 2. The music in here is just is iconic, right? I mean, the music that's kind of that comes right off of the show. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood show. Just that, like Will posted something about ding ding about the trolley, and all I can hear is do 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 do. As the trolley comes around the corner, I'm like, bring me right back. Who doesn't love the trolley? I want to talk about another sequence in this movie that I thought was brilliant, probably the highlight of the movie for me, which was when Vogel, I forget what happens to him, but he ends up waking up in the land of make-believe.
Yes, that was amazing.
Dream sequence.
Yeah, and he's talking to King Friday the 13th, and of course Daniel Striped Tiger, and Lady Lane, Fairchild, and it was a great scene. I wish they had kind of actually done a little bit more of that in this movie, kind of brought it into the land of make-believe. It would have made it seem more interesting to me, other than just a standard, family drama, guy with daddy issues, which that was the genesis of my This Is Us comment earlier, because I'm like, this is exactly like an episode of This Is Us, where there was nothing extraordinary about that or the way it was presented. The Fred Rogers stuff was great, how they brought it into like the land of make-believe, and but man, this guy Louis Vogel was such an asshole. Like, he was he was definitely not a likable character, and I didn't even mean like towards the end. I mean, I think his father had way more of an arc than he did, than this character did. I don't know. I just never bought into the fact that he was really going to change or really see the light, and the movie didn't bring me to that, and I wish it had.
I think that there's kind of two ways that you can look at this one, and I say this because I've looked at this film both ways. There, especially in real time, there are elements of the film, especially with Vogel's arc, that are very simplistic, right? Like that they feel like they're very just like he just has to get from point A to point B, and there's not a lot of twists and turns along the way to get him there. But think about the framing of this film. This entire film is one long children's episode with I guess a more adult cast, of course, but a lot of it's telling a parable, and it's doing so by telling the story of a character who has to go from grumpy and jaded to willing to let go of that darkness and forgive a dying man. Like, I think because of that, I've sort of come around on that element and think that the sort of the simplicity of that arc is actually sort of a plus instead of a negative.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of wish Rogers had taken him by the collar and say, hey, you think you got it really bad? Come over here and meet this kid, Timmy, over here, who can't get out of his wheelchair and like has to, have. I don't know. This guy, he just.
But that's
But
but that's not
Mr.
Mr.
Rogers,
Rogers,
though?
though.
No,
Mr. Rogers doesn't
I
do
know
that.
it's not. I was half
Okay.
joking with. I was half joking.
Fair.
But I'm just saying that this guy was. I just couldn't get behind his redemption, and I think that was really the whole movie. Unfortunately, I don't know. I just had a block with this character. He started off. He pissed me off right off the bat with like, oh, you mean you're gonna make me cover this kids show? I'm like, okay, I guess some people probably feel that way, but he seemed to have no desire or willingness to even flex on that point.
Well, but
And
take it the other way.
and interview an iconic character in.
But what would this movie have been if the character going to interview Mr. Rogers loved Mr. Rogers? Right? It would have just been a Mr. Rogers love gush fest. I actually found it really interesting having a character who was negative, who was not bought into Mr. Rogers, who wanted to find the fake, like, falseness of Mr. Rogers, and ended up coming out the end of the experience being on trolley. You know what I'm saying?
I know it's not this movie, but I think I would have wanted a character that maybe at one time did love Mr. Rogers, and he just kind of had gotten away from it, and he was able to be brought back into some semblance of human empathy again.
I think that the thing that's super relatable about this character, aside from the grudge and which I think is also super relatable. I think that's something that we've all experienced, like that family relationship, or that I think about just as a professional in whatever line you are, especially if you're in kind of that track where you're like hungry to succeed, hungry to make a name, you want the juicy assignments, right? Like you don't want to, no matter what it is that you happen to do, if you just happen to be working in a shop, you want to work in kind of the fun, exciting department. You don't want to necessarily work in kind of the boring department that no one goes to. If it's something that's more high profile, like writing, you want to get like that juicy topic that lets you get more and more juicy topics, that lets you get Pulitzers, or lets you kind of become one of those like profile people. And instead, feeling like you're relegated to doing a puff piece can feel like you're taking a step backwards. So I totally get that, because I think that that's something that we've all experienced at some time. We want to be on the fast track project. We don't want to necessarily feel like our careers are taking a backtrack, especially for a character like this who he's just had a baby. He's got a young family that he's developed. He's got now, and so he's on this track where he just really wants to be work driven and sort of make a name for himself and get ahead of the pack. I bought into this a little bit more because they gave us enough, and the character is a little bit, in a good way, two-dimensional about this, right? He is a very flat character in terms of like his setup at the beginning, because we need to be able to see that very firm contrast by the time he gets there at the end. So I'm a little better with kind of where he started out.
Yeah, and I totally get that. I wanted to give a shout out to the supporting cast here, more of the supporting cast. Brad, you mentioned the character, was it Dorothy?
Yes,
I think you
Dorothy.
said?
Yep.
Dorothy. But I thought we also noticed Susan Kelechi Watson, right? She is from This Is Us.
Yep.
I thought she was really great as Andrea Vogel, Lloyd's wife in this. I thought she was really, really good. Marianne Plunkett played Joanne Rogers, who is Fred's wife in this movie. She was excellent as well. And Chris Cooper, who played the dad. I love Chris Cooper. He's a really great actor. Doesn't get in as much stuff as I would have liked to see him in, but I can remember him in I think he was in like Secretariat. I'm not sure if that was the movie he was in, but I really love some of his stuff. So I thought the supporting cast was great in this. Of course, Tom Hanks is going to get all the lion's share of attention for this movie, but I thought the supporting cast was just as much of a strength.
Brad, you mentioned crying, and I know that you said you cried all the way through this movie, but if you could pick out one scene that like most jumped up and down on your heartstrings, which one would you say?
Oh, golly gosh. I think the most powerful scene for me was where Fred Rogers takes Lloyd back to his apartment and he's showing him his puppets. And he starts trying to get through to Lloyd through Daniel Striped Tiger instead of talking to him like person to person. And Lloyd is like, would you just get those puppets out of here? Like, I don't want to, you know. And so Fred Rogers like puts the puppets down, but then has like this like person to person sincere moment with Lloyd. And, you know, it really spoke to me in some ways because, I don't know, when I was growing up watching Mr. Rogers, I don't know, hearing adults talk to you about things was somehow like different than the puppets talking to us about things. And so, I don't know, like, that was just really powerful to see Lloyd ultimately like reject Mr. Rogers. And Jim, this kind of goes back to something I was talking about earlier. I think that's what makes this such a fascinating interplay, because if it was someone who loved Mr. Rogers either presently or in the past, that person probably would have been all about talking to Daniel Striped Tiger. But Lloyd actively like pushed that away. And so then when later on Lloyd has this moment of opening up to Fred and like letting Fred in, I think that made the payoff feel earned and all the better for me. So that was a big moment for me, Will. Were there any for you?
I think that scene, and for maybe a slightly different reason, because I think there was another thing at play in that scene, but I think it was that same scene. And there is a moment where, so Lloyd doesn't just go from I hate this message to I'm fully on board. There are these kind of minor moments along the way where he starts to maybe buy in and then distance himself again, like he just can't let himself. And in that very scene, there's this moment where it looks like he's absorbing what Mr. Rogers is saying, and then he has this moment where he just sort of like realizes that he's being sucked into this and has this look of just like, you motherfucker, you almost got me, and pulled himself out of that conversation. And I think that moment itself was, I think, especially emotional for me, because I think that it wasn't as much like that he changed, but it was just like, I understand that feeling very, very well, of like when you are like grumpy and angry, or maybe you've been fighting with your partner or a family member, something like that, and then like something funny happens, or you start to hear something a little different and you start to smile, but then you grump back up again because you're supposed to be angry. Like, it's such a real human thing, like that precipice between I'm not angry anymore. And we got to see that here with Lloyd, and he doesn't embrace it here, but the seed's been planted. The seed's been planted. The watering can is on it. It just hasn't had time to bloom.
And then the untitled goose walks by and steals the watering can. Honk honk.
Yes.
Ding, 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 ding,
So
ding,
when
ding.
we said whether or not this film is necessary or not, Untitled Goose meets Mr. Rogers, 100% necessary.
Yes. Somebody's doing that mashup. You know what's happening.
I wouldn't doubt it. All right, fellas, before we move on to some plugs, let's get out some final thoughts on A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Anything you have to jump in with?
I think I was maybe the lowest on this movie. That doesn't mean I didn't like it. I did enjoy the movie, but it did have some issues for me, both narratively and in the lead. Unfortunately, the lead performance, and that were just too much for me to overcome.
All right, Will.
Yeah, I was the middlest of the three of us, in that I really, really liked this movie. It's not, I guess, spoiler for the end of the year, it's not going to be in my top 10, but that doesn't mean that it's not a really solid movie. And I think that the true strength of this movie is, I think that especially Thanksgiving and Christmas are really hard because, you're spending time with family and you don't always get along with your family, or you maybe don't agree on all points, or sometimes maybe you haven't buried that hatchet yet. I think that in addition to this being a heartwarming movie, whatever, I think because this movie is so much about those familial bonds and how you can kind of reach that state of forgiveness, I think this is an especially poignant one for maybe Thursday night when everyone's like coming down off of their turkey high, or Friday morning when everyone, you haven't gone back to work yet, but you need something to do. I think this is a really good movie to watch with your family over Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and I would even say this time of year is hard because what if you don't have a lot of family that you can be with, or, you're at odds with your family, or you're just down, the holidays, seasonal depression. I
Yeah.
mean, it's totally a thing. And I think this is a fantastic movie to see if you are struggling with your emotions, if you're having a hard time. I think just life in America right now, you turn on the news, everything is fucking depressing. I don't know if you have a hard time talking about your feelings with other people or expressing them even to yourself in some ways. You've got these walls, these shields up. I think even though it is Tom Hanks being Mr. Rogers, I think having Mr. Rogers talk directly to you through the screen, it kind of softens the ice a little bit and maybe helps you to get some things out and maybe embrace being closer to other people in a very hard time of the year. So I'd say, do it, see it. Hopefully it has a positive impact.
Because, Brad, what do you do with those feelings of sadness after you've had your turkey? Yeah.
You put your mad in the turkey's ass and then throw it in the trash.
What?
I don't know if Fred ever actually said that. I'm just saying.
You know what? I think that was in Mr. Rogers' After Dark. I don't know.
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood Back Alley.
Don't.
Yeah, this goes nowhere good. You're right.
As Andrea Fogel says in the movie, don't ruin my childhood.
That's right.
Yeah, good point. We'll leave him in his
words of
his
wisdom.
wonderful
Andrea.
little niceness bubble.
There we go. All right. Well, that brings us to a close for a beautiful day in the neighborhood. We're going to move on to some quick plugs before we wrap up for the week. Let's go ahead and officially make that transition. I just want to plug something. I think I plugged it on the show several years ago, but a lot of people weren't able to access this series because they didn't have Disney XD. They didn't pay for it in their cable package. They didn't want to buy the seasons on iTunes or Amazon or whatever. Who wants to spend money on an unknown, quantity? But now with Disney Plus out and so many people having Disney Plus subscriptions, this is the perfect time to check out this series, especially in the lead up to Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. This series doesn't directly deal with the Skywalker folks at all, but Star Wars Rebels is a phenomenal animated series, probably one of the best Star Wars things ever since the original 1977 Star Wars came out. The show had a few seasons. It was really exceptional. You don't have to have watched the Clone Wars animated series that came out before it, although if you have, it helps. We talked a lot about Dave Filoni last week when we were talking about The Mandalorian. And Dave Filoni headed up Star Wars Rebels. So if you're watching The Mandalorian and you're like, fuck, this is so good, watch Star Wars Rebels, because I think you're going to have a hell of a fucking time with it. It's amazing. And it's on Disney Plus right now.
Okay.
You can binge it.
Does it have, is Baby Yoda in that one?
Baby Yoda is not in that.
Then how could it even be close to as good as The Mandalorian? How could it possibly be that good? I mean, we know that Baby Yoda is the thing that makes Mandalorian good, so anyway.
If only there was I need my Baby Yoda Fire Lizard mashup merch right
This
now.
is the way. I have spoken. In any event, check it out. Will, what have you got this week?
Good plug.
I mentioned it earlier, but this will be my plug for it. I caught up with the movie Waves this week, and it's in my top 10 of the year. It's an easy 5-star for me. New movie by Trey Edward Schultz. It's the story about this African-American family who lives in just a suburban town, and they have to deal with the different... Jim's giving me looks.
Keep going.
Yeah.
I just heard that you're supposed to not hear a lot about this movie.
No, I'm not doing any of the stuff. No. Like the stuff, like this. I'm giving you less than you get in the trailer, honestly.
Right.
But it's a suburban African American family that has to deal with just some of the stuff that comes along through them as it plays out over a couple of key relationships in their life. This is a remarkably directed film. This is with some absolutely stunning shots. There's, in fact, someone after we watched it said that it reminded them, not because of the African American parts of it, but because of some of the shots reminded them of like the cinematography in Moonlight, and I'm on board with that. There is this is the type of movie that is beautifully shot, heartbreaking in moments, absolutely heartwarming in other moments. I loved every single one of these characters, every single one of them, and I appreciated some of the very ballsy moves that the story made, because this is a movie that is very okay with taking some chances. I've skirted around all of the plot details specifically, but I strongly recommend you check out Waves. It will wreck you in the most beautiful way possible.
It's A24, so, and they don't really put out garbage, so it's got a good chance of being good.
A24, like, they fire on all cylinders for me. I mean, they make like the filmography in my life these days.
Awesome. Sounds
Very
like a
cool.
great plug. Well, all right, Jim, how about for you?
I got a chance to get out to the movie and see one that's kind of floating around. It's still out there in movie theaters. It's been out for a couple weeks now, I think, called The Good Liar. This is a movie with Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen. Basically a two-hander about a con man played by Ian McKellen who tries to make a mark of widow Helen Mirren, and who's worth some money. So he's trying to take her down and get the money through getting close to her and starting a relationship. But, and I'm just reading IMDb here, but what should be a simple swindle turns out to be something else altogether. So that's all I'm going to say. It's kind of a twisty, kind of like cat and mouse, spy versus spy kind of film. And I kind of dug it. It was pretty delicious. I like some of the turns it took. The performances are really good, right? Helen Mirren, you can't go wrong with her, and Ian McKellen. And there's a couple of supporting. Will, did you see this one?
I actually didn't. No.
Oh, so there's an angle in this movie that kind of totally unexpected, involving some supporting character. I'll just leave it at that, which kind of floored me, and I'm like, oh, that makes this movie even more delightful. So this movie's called The Good Liar. It's a pretty short movie. It's like an hour and a half. So it's not going to. I think it's it's almost an hour and 50 minutes. So, but it goes by really fast. So, it's called The Good Liar. Check it out. It's in theaters now.
All right. Excellent. Well, it has been wonderful sharing with all of you today out there in the land of make believe and Arendelle as we talked Frozen 2 and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us in the live chat or joining us on digital tape delay, whether you access the show as it's happening or, weeks, months, sometimes years later. We love and appreciate you just as much. Guys, let's close things out by sharing with folks how they can connect with us between now and next week if they want to talk movies. Jim, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter. That's where I talk about movies the most. My handle on Twitter is @JJP Out West, OUTWEST, all one word, JJP Out West. Also find me on Facebook, The Book of Faces. My name, Jim Pugliafico. That's where you find me.
All right, excellent. Thanks. And Will, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Whatever Cove. I'm a bit more active, though, on Facebook. Look for William Lindis. Send me a message first, just so I know who you are and how the hell you found me. And then you can also find me on Letterboxd, letterboxd.com, a site for reviewing, logging films, and connecting with other people that do the same. Just look for William Lindis, and you should find me there as well.
Rock on. Thanks, Will. And folks, you can find me on Facebook. Just search for Brad Harris. I think you have to be a friend of a friend to request me. I instituted that because of the bots, but chances are pretty good you are a friend of a friend. If not, just send me a message anyway. I've learned to check that mysterious Folks, thanks again for tuning in. If you're here in the United States and you celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving from the Movie Bears podcast. And we'll see you all next time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.